All right, thanks everyone for coming today. It's so great to have so many of you. It's such an honor to have such a great group here. I hope you all had a good time and had good conversations. Special thanks to the Zero Eyes team and the GreatPoint Ventures team, fly all the way from the U.S. here to join us today. Let me quickly introduce our impressive speakers today, DJ and Yevgeniy. DJ is an accomplished entrepreneur, investor, scientist, and public policy leader. He has led senior roles in industry, academia, and government, and is currently a general partner at GreatPoint Ventures. DJ has served as the first U.S. Chief Data Scientist under President Obama and has led much of the broad-known data-driven public health policy. DJ's industry experience includes serving as chief scientist and chief security officer at LinkedIn, where he led the company's data efforts in the early days and created the popular data streaming tool Kafka, which later became the Confluent. And he is also a founding executive and CTO at Devoted Health, where he played a key role in building a healthcare system focused on personalized care. DJ is an advisor and investor in many startups, including being the first investor in Figma, which was acquired by Adobe for $20 billion. Welcome, DJ. Okay, Yevgeniy is our CEO and co-founder of Shakudo. Before Yevgeniy built Shakudo, he has been building enterprise AI teams in BMO and Borealis, and he has helped startups growing their own teams when he was in the Georgian Partners. Prior to entering VC world, he was a senior engineer at Amazon and started his career as a research scientist at Columbia University in New York. Yevgeniy and I has worked in Borealis many years, and then at BMO, then we met Christine, which is our head of engineering. We're thrilled to have DJ and Yevgeniy join us today for the fire chat. Very excited about the insightful discussion.
Okay. Thanks, Toal.
I have my Canadian beer, so all is good.
None of the flights got canceled this time, so that's right. So super excited to have you here, and thanks everyone for joining. It's our first event, so we didn't really know what to expect, but yeah there you go. Thank you. Turned out really nicely, and a lot of really interesting people here.
Well, it's a good thing Shakudo is my first real investment too.
That's
so
right.
it works out. It's first all around.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of firsts today.
Yeah, it's not my first time at Toronto though. So Daniel Moore is somewhere here. Daniel's back there. Daniel used to bring me here once a quarter for a long time, like at least 5 years. I'd come here like once a quarter and hang out. So yeah, it's great to be back.
Welcome back, and awesome to have you here. And so just to kind of kick things off, the topic was, where's the world of data going? But we'll start with talking about the most interesting person in this room, and that's DJ.
No, because I know a bunch of people here.
Yeah, they're super interesting. I agree. So you had a very interesting trajectory, and you've done a lot in the space from early days at LinkedIn through eBay, White House, Devoted Health, and now GreatPoint. And you've seen the data space evolve from, I don't even know what point, maybe there wasn't actually a data space at that point, to what it is today. And so I'm just kind of curious, in terms of the pace, do you see it accelerating massively recently, or has that acceleration been going on for a very long time and we're just catching up to it?
Yeah, so maybe let me start back a little bit around the current rendition of the data space, because the data space, I think, has gone through so many different phases. At least this latest data science phase and the big data movement, one of the things that people don't realize is how important these kind of events were. So there actually was a creation of a distribution, a Google group, effectively. And we called it the Data Drinking Group. And it used to be anybody who was involved with
In data and
suffering.
drinking,
It was like communal suffering of data. And we'd get together and just like suffer into our beer. And then none of us could really afford anything. So we'd have like really cheap Chinese food. And that group that got together, that included like Chris Albin, who's the head of machine learning AI for Wikipedia, included Jeff Hammerbacher, who was running the data team at Facebook, Pete Skomarach, Sam Shaw, some people know, is kind of the key guy behind Dolly, Monica Ragati, who built the first real recommendation engine for social media companies, that whole crew. And we'd get together and we'd collaborate. So the reason I'm saying
this. That was at LinkedIn when you were at LinkedIn?
This is at LinkedIn. Actually, even at eBay, a bunch of us were getting together because we didn't know what to call ourselves. We didn't know where we existed in companies. And so the reason that I'm bringing this up is something that I see in the Toronto ecosystem that I feel very strongly about. Jamie and I were talking about this. Jamie from Golden over there, we're talking about this, which is the how primed this community is to do remarkable things. And a lot of this reminds me of that. And so if you haven't met, like today, before you leave, you should meet somebody that's really interesting and ask them about like, what problem are you trying to solve? Something like where you're able to really foster this network. And the next time, think about someone who else should be here at one of these things, and make sure to bring one of these people, because there's so many people out there that do not have representation, don't have the ability to be in part of groups, and get them to come to these events too. And then we'll be able to build something even more holistic. But that's really where the acceleration started.
And that was so that was kind of early days back then. I think people weren't really thinking about this as AI, right? It was,
well, in fact, we were. We just thought it would be the worst thing ever to call it AI, because we had seen that before. And like I
might still be true.
Yeah, well, I also kind of had been very fortunate. My dad was a professor at MIT early on, and during the early phase of AI, my uncle was part of the AI phase with all the names that you've heard from people. I kind of used to get babysat by all these people, and I used to go, like, I got exposed to the AAA conferences when I was a kid, and I was like, I watched the absolute crushing disaster that happened around as AI got overhyped. And so we intentionally were like, we will never, ever use the word AI, even if we're doing stuff.
It's just data.
It was, well, we were just like machine learning. The reason we kind of moved to the term data scientist, and this, for those that don't know the story, maybe the quick version of it is, we didn't know what to call ourselves. LinkedIn was getting ready for the IPO, filing the S1. Facebook was getting ready to work on the S1. And what people don't realize is, like, even though it's Facebook and LinkedIn, we were trading notes very aggressively. We were sharing a ton of stuff, and specifically like what technologies are working, what vendors are working, all of this. And one of the times Jeff and I were sitting down was, what are you calling your team? HR was like, you guys got too many job titles, like engineers, sales, marketing, like what the heck are you guys? And come up with a career ladder. And we came up with a list. Research scientist sounded too academic. Analysts felt too much Wall Street. So we kind of go through that stuff. But what ended up happening is Jeff actually had the idea of data scientist, which I personally thought was too like repetitive, data and scientists. So,
and just for people who don't know, who's Jeff?
Oh, this is Jeff Hammerbacher, who used to initially run the data science team at Facebook.
Got it.
And we took this list back to the team at LinkedIn, and Monica had this great idea. She's like, well, we have LinkedIn. Why don't we post every job that we have access to with all the different job titles and see what people apply to? And everyone applied to the data scientist one. So that's what we called ourselves. But the thing
that also makes sense.
Yeah, but this is the reason why I think data scientist has taken off, is fundamentally no one knows what it means.
It can be anything.
It can be anything.
It's kind of like chief of staff.
But like, think about it when you're like, it's chief of staff, except it's a useful thing. Some chief of staff is going to.
But just to be clear, because I'm not sure if it was obvious from what DJ was saying. So DJ and Jeff, I think, together actually invented the term data scientist, and we all know that term. So just like the impact of that is pretty profound. So
yeah, thank you. But the part there that the reason it works, and I'll get to AI in a second, is because as a nerd, now you had the opportunity to be close to the problem. You were in the room as the problem was being discussed. So you had context. Because you have context, you were able to bring your skills, your power, accessibility to data was showing up, compute was showing up, tooling was showing up. So now you could really show value. What I think has happened, we're seeing that same playbook happen with AI now, where the data science, whether you call yourself a data scientist, AI engineer, whatever, it's all part of the same genre of using data effectively to solve problems.
Yeah, to get insights.
Be able to deliver a solution, build a product, you name it, but deliver value. And what we're seeing now is, we have a new set of skills, ideas, techniques, technology. Shakudo is a key component of this, is to be able to deliver those solutions at scale, at time, in a fast time manner, and be able to do it with a degree of sophistication that it was not there. So that beginning is really in process right now. And people ask me all the time, is like, are we done with that? And I had the opportunity to help frame the United States national strategy around AI. And one of the things I think which we thought back then was, we were like, well, like, you're trying to figure out how this is going to shape. And the stuff, like, as we look back when we were writing that strategy and what we see now, I think we are just still so early in this journey.
Absolutely. That's very clear. There's still a lot of POCs, experimentation. Still, a lot of it doesn't make it to production. So, slightly different question. So you've joined GreatPoint Ventures earlier this year, and we'll talk about the investment in Shakudo in a moment. But you've joined for a reason. It's a great fund, but it's also a great time to be investing in AI. And it probably has to do quite a bit with the use cases and the actual problems you can solve in healthcare, in government, in robotics, right? Finance. And so I'm curious, among all these different areas, which ones excite you the most? And I guess as an investor and as the first U.S. Chief Data Scientist, how are you thinking about it?
So I would actually posit it is the best time to be a builder. Like, being an investor is like actually pretty shitty, because it's like it's like there's so much out there. There's so much opportunity. It's really hard. It's competitive. There's a lot of.
We hit the bottom already. It's all only up from now. Right?
But like you think about, like, you have this. We have very rarely in history had this amount of human brain power dedicated to a swath of technology with a goal of having impact. That is very, very hard to do. And thankfully, it's not crypto anymore. Like, we don't need more brain power. I know somebody's going to be like, I'm okay with that hate, just to be. But the part here that is very exciting is it is literally the most target-rich environment ever. Like, you want to go work on healthcare, amazing. You want to take on underlying structural ways to empower people, like Shakudo is, like you are, like Stella, and then the rest of the team are doing it, and Christine are doing, and that is phenomenal. But then there's also all these other things that seem super breakthrough potential: protein folding, new discovery of new alloys, computational fluid dynamics speed up. If you think about the greatest problems that we are about to face as humanity, questions around climate change, questions around energy resources, questions around health, transforming our ability to deliver care solutions to people, all these things. The force multiplier still to this day is data, and the way that you make that data applicable and scalable are forms of machine learning, AI. And people often, depends how you want to cut this, because you can not just large language models, generative AI, computer vision. There's so much in here I expect a lot more breakthroughs.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's a different type of technology. Software has kind of been ramping up for decades. It feels different this time. And so for a lot of these use cases that you mentioned, protein folding, fluid dynamics, really a lot of simulation use cases, for example, which can enable things that weren't even possible. It's not just a cost thing. It's just not possible to run these experiments in the real world. You need a lot of compute, and it's specialized compute, specialized infrastructure. And so we have Adam from NVIDIA here. There he is. So NVIDIA.
Wow, that's dangerous. Free drinks for Adam.
That's right.
Get a GPU.
You get a GPU on the way out. Yeah. Actually, you don't, because they're not available. There's a short supply.
Jensen's gonna crush me.
Yeah. And so we're starting to see supply chain issues around that. And initially it just feels like a tech problem. But if you start solving real AI problems that are like humanity level problems that you described, do you think it's going to become an actual barrier and slow down the innovation in the space?
So I would say, unfortunately, it already is a barrier. And there's a couple different ways it's a barrier. The first is, if you have access to, so suppose you come up with a great idea and you say, I would like to scale this. There's a carrying capacity we have really fundamentally limited by NVIDIA's ability to deliver their solutions. It's not a criticism of NVIDIA, that's just a reality of
there's physical components.
Right. It's why they are such a valuable company. Now, what do we think is, people are having to be innovative around that, and the ability, and that is going to force breakthroughs. Those breakthroughs, unfortunately, are not going to materialize, in a short order.
Takes years.
It's silicon. It's going to take a little bit of time. Excuse me. But I think what we're going to do, we're going to see people be crafty and clever, and that cleverness is what's going to create new paradigms, new ideas to figure out how to do things.
So making new chips, but also making model training more efficient, compressing it, being more efficient with data, all of those things. The other thing we talked about.
Well, I was going to add one more in here is, this is a national security question too.
Yeah, because it's manufactured in China.
Well, a lot of times people think about China only, but there's a lot of other applications of these technologies, and there's a lot of questions around human rights, surveillance technologies. We're seeing what's happening in the Ukrainian fight. Questions about autonomous weapon systems, usage of drones. So there's a lot of complexity in this space when you have this kind of technology as democratized and accessible. And we're early in this frame.
It's a whole different debate we could have maybe at the next event of what happens when the bad guys start using these things first, right? And
the bad guys are using these things.
Yeah.
We should be clear, that's and we should expect that. I think there's a lot of questions, and people are naturally, I think, if you aren't asking this question, you should be asking this question, which is, what defines a bad guy? And what defines overreach? What defines values? How do we think about representation? All of these questions. The reason I emphasize this is the people that are going to figure this out are the people that are building these things. The frameworks that you lay into this. I'll tell you a quick one. Everyone thinks when they first saw the first LinkedIn talent matching algorithm, their job recommender system, everyone's like, whoa, this is really novel. What people don't realize is what is the motivation for that problem. I had many friends who were returning enlisted service. They'd signed up for the military. 9/11 happened. They'd gone off to Iraq and Afghanistan. You can debate about all those things, but they were sent on their tour of duty. They come back and they take terrible jobs. They don't have a way of career transitioning. And we've seen what happens with that in other conflicts. People get in a downward spiral, end up homeless, end up with drug abuse problems. And I didn't want to see that happen to my friends. So what's the right answer? We said, well, if we're LinkedIn, we control all this. I'm responsible for the entire product line of all data solutions, all those things, and I control the resources. So you know what? We're going to build a product for them. It's going to be a product that if we build it for them and it works, it's going to work for everyone. So what the emphasis here is, and the reason I share that is we as a community get to control the destiny of how this plays out. The choices we make, the choices we don't make, that is what is going to lay out the how this plays out fundamentally.
And it's a fascinating story about the LinkedIn matching algorithm. I think it's that's really inspiring.
And credit for that, just to be clear, should go to Monica Ragati. She's the one who actually really built it out. Jay Krebs, John Rao, Anmol Bashin, they're the ones who actually implemented it and figured out how to scale it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there were quite a few people involved in that project. Yeah. So we talked about talent a bit now, and also just before we started. And so, do you think? So we talked about supply chain, which was going to be a limitation. Is talent a limitation? It's hard to say. It was obvious a few years ago that shortage of data scientists is a barrier, but we've both gone through a market change and we've gone through a big period of training a lot of data scientists. And so I'm curious, from what you see, do you still see it as a barrier, or do you feel like we've reached an equilibrium and now it's just kind of a standard type of journey for this profession, like software engineering, for example?
This is a really interesting question, and I'm going to flip the question around to you in a second here because I think it's so important. I think the question really is for what problems we're trying to solve. If everyone is just racing to make a buck, the classic thing that we've had is people go to where the money flows. And so that has historically been many of the big companies and the social media companies. That's where the salaries have been, all those other things. I'll call out Hillary Hartley here, who's Hillary was provisional, doing a bunch of provisional government, building for the Canadian government. She was part of the U.S. federal government, and then also now runs U.S. Digital Response. And if you look at her world, she's able to recruit phenomenal talent to work on problems that, most people would say, oh, that's there's no money there. But what there is there's an ability to impact someone's life. And so you're able to get that caliber of talent. Now, what we have to do is allow that talent to be able to use the tools and all the other things so they can deliver on it. What I think we have now as we go to the talent lane is what we have to figure out is how to make people successful in their organizations. In a startup, that's relatively easy as long as you have the right, approach and attitude to working on problems. But this is where, I would argue,
is easy. Yeah.
Well, this is why I was going to flip it around, is because, part of the way you are approaching this in the mission of Shakudo is you are out there to empower these people. So I'm going to ask you why, and how do you see Shakudo empowering people inside these organizations?
Yeah, thanks, DJ. So I'm not going to do a sales pitch, but I will tell you what Shakudo does first. You can
Jamie and I are okay with that. We're
totally
good.
Fine. Yeah, you can think of us as an operating system for data stacks. So we go into an organization and we make it easy for them to stand up, maintain, and evolve their stacks. And so what that means is, and kind of tying it back to the talent conversation, there's a broader access to talent because you can leverage the tooling that people actually want to use and are learning in the industry. And we see it with our customers. Neil over there is running data at Quadrille, and it's easier to attract talent because they get to work with the tools that help them grow as data scientists. And so I think empowering data scientists to both be successful, but also deliver value to the business is a big part of making this whole equation work. And that's part of the side effects of what we do. But for a second, just to get back to you. So if you think about...
Let me add, like, one of the reasons, I don't know if people had a chance to see the blog post that I wrote about why I'm excited about Shakudo, but this kind of is a broader theme. So, like, we've been on this journey for building these data solutions, and we'd like to say about how amazing all this tech is. And then COVID happens. And if you've read Michael Lewis's last book, Premonition, you see the role that we played running the California COVID response and this insanity that was happening. But part of that was, okay, this is our moment to shine. We as data scientists, like, how many people here actually built an epidemiology model? People who's going to like admit it. Like, I know that Ryan's like all day long. Like, everyone is building stuff. Everyone's trying to pull in data. Everyone's doing some kind of analysis. It was like we were like a new form of, like, we were all like the U.S. version of the CDC, just stuck at home. But at the same time, those of us who were trying to put this data out there and everything together were like, great, should we do a pilot with, such and such company and this? We're like, it's a pandemic. We need the stuff to, like, yesterday. Like, people are like, well, let's scope out the table structure. Let's scope out how this is going to work. I was like, yesterday, we have to go now. And so it was literally like, we need a data stack now. I need to make a whole lot of choices with unbelievable flexibility to get the job done. And we were talking, like, it was going to be months, if not a year and a half to get this stuff stood up. And it was a dawning, painful realization that as much innovation as we've done around the modern data stack, it's still so complex. It's so hard to get going that we need an OS layer, an app sitting on top of it so you can get going. Maybe you eventually graduate forward onto something else or other things, but that there's always a degree where you need something like a Shakudo-esque layer to make you empowered to do stuff.
Everything needs an operating system, and the data space is pretty much one of the few that doesn't have it, right? So if you think about sales, there's Salesforce, there's HubSpot for marketing, there's iOS for consumer apps on the phone, but for data, there's actually nothing out there that lets you access all these technologies that DJ is talking about. And so that's what Shakudo does. So our VP of sales is right there. I think he'll get you on the way out. But no, that's awesome, DJ. And so maybe one last question to kind of wrap up, and then we can turn this away to the audience. So you can start talking about the value of Shakudo. Maybe we can spend the next couple of minutes talking about why GreatPoint invested in Shakudo and why we were so excited to work with GreatPoint. So I'll start with you. What got you, other than the fact that we were in the operating system, what got you excited
why am I a VC first? Yeah. Well, part of it is I think one of the things that I've been super fortunate to have, from the vantage point I've been, we're on year 6 of the healthcare company we've built, Devoted Health. It's been a phenomenal adventure. It's still very early in the journey. We're only in year 5 of the care model. We are the fastest growing healthcare version of healthcare that's in the United States is referred to as Medicare Advantage, taking care of senior citizens. We're not like fancy wearables or anything. We do the hard ground game of taking care of people. And one of the things that I realized is what's very important for me is I have been so unbelievably fortunate to work in so many different environments. What is really critical for me is how can I try to find a way to make that scalable and support many more entrepreneurs, people like you, to go forward and do this and carry this forward. And so as I look at that and I look at the problem sets like that I've just described around COVID or other places where you have a problem, you need a solution very quickly, time to go. That's what really resonated with me from the GreatPoint Ventures side. GreatPoint Ventures, the motto of the firm, we're very small firm, luckily, thankfully. We're only 13 people, and that makes us very hands-on, very operational. But the motto is make no small plans. Make no small plans. And I think that's what attracts us the most to Shakudo. I think there's something also there is that you're all in Toronto, honestly, and I think that we've had this discussion if people may not realize Yevgeniy says, hey, we should put something in San Francisco. I'm like, why would you want to do that? Like you have such a great spot here, build from here to go to build remarkable things. And so I think the community, to get this right, Daniel and I were talking earlier about this feels like New York 10 years ago when there's really a very early ecosystem. And I think this is very exciting to do from here. And I think the other part that's there is there's a lot. One of the mistakes I think that we had in early data phase of the big data movement is we really built for each other. And so that was the social media companies. And so when we were building out Hadoop and all these other things, we really missed on things like the permission layers and other things, which are essential for very large enterprises.
The operating layer.
The operating layer, a lot, we just missed because we were so focused on what was around us. And I think we didn't have the right mix of others in our environment to be able to get that correct. You have an opportunity here to do that in a smarter, faster way.
And there's a lot of movement in the industry that helps make sure it's actually adopted and used, and value comes out of it on the other side.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So just in terms of Shakudo, I'm not sure if everyone here knows, we recently raised the Series A. It was led by GreatPoint Ventures. We have DJ as our board member and led the rounds, and Gautam and Krish are here as well. I'm not sure if there's so there you go. Hey, they're there. They flew in from San Francisco to visit us. So if you guys are a founder, I suggest to talk to them. And Jamie, of course, he's been on our board for a few years now, led our seed round. So very fortunate to have an excellent group of investors. And what really got us very excited about GreatPoint and DJ, I mean, I don't think I really need to explain why DJ is exciting. You just heard him talk. But, the whole fund, the whole thesis is really very high conviction focused, very focused on the product, and very focused on understanding in depth what the company does and what it's trying to achieve. And that strongly resonated with us. We're 3 technical founders. Technical founders love to talk about the product, and just the breadth of expertise and the breadth of network, both on the product and the business side, was extremely compelling. So we're very excited about the partnership.
Thank you.
And so with that, maybe
let's ask questions.
Yeah, let's go.
We can go in any direction people want, but you get to pick out. You have to choose them.
I know this is intended for DJ, but I'll jump in and so a lot of enterprise executives are risk averse. That's just what it is. And so one of the risks that they don't sometimes realize is the risk of locking yourself in to the wrong choices early on. When you start a new initiative, you start a new project, a new data system, you make some choices, And if you didn't have the exactly right people telling you the exactly right things at that moment, you'll make some very expensive mistakes. And so one of the things we constantly try to educate people on and tell them, whether they use Shakudo or not, is leave the optionality there. Make it possible for yourself to evolve your systems, not just make one decision at a point in time, because you're going to regret it later. But DJ, maybe.
No, I think that's right. I think the other thing, which I think, and you said it, is a developer first mindset. And we have a tension inside the organization between people who are trying to figure out cost structure, having too many things, and then not, having technologies or ideas or products orphaned. And a lot of the tools that people want or need, they aren't allowed to use. And so it's very frustrating. Like, why do people leave? Like, you have a lot of good companies that they're really fundamentally good businesses. They could do really powerful things. And you have somebody who's effectively forcing them to walk through molasses, maple syrup. I just see so many people suffering. And then, I point out to executives all the time, I'm like, what do you think your developers do when they go home? What do you think, they're doing? And it's like, they're like, oh, they're thinking about our problem. I'm like, yeah, right. And then you get them in a room and you ask them, and they're all playing with open source technologies, doing things. And so I think there's been a pretty strong realization that people know they have to do that. I think this AI moment is an extraordinarily powerful one to catalyze culture, to get it correct, because people go, oh, that's why we need to do this. When we were arguing for the first time about this, why Fortune 1000 companies need to have a data person around, a data strategy. The way I would explain it, we wrote this article for Harvard Business Review that they named, the data science, the sexiest job of the 21st century. But the part that we really argued was, hey, if you're Captain Kirk, who's Spock on the bridge for you? Like,
a lot of people don't know what Star Trek is.
No, they did a remake. They did a remake.
Most of my team doesn't know. It's embarrassing to me.
Homework, culture, like team building event.
Especially Captain Kirk.
Yeah, team building. I'm gonna stay with it, but it's like, and this is why is the role of the U.S. Chief Data Scientist created? Like, what is the fundamental reason? Why would the President of the United States, President Obama, see that? Well, he had seen the power of data starting to transform the way things were done everywhere from his campaign all the way through the beginning portion of the administration. He said, and the first two CTOs, Anish Chopra and then Todd Park, were all about opening up data. And people were going, whoa, every time you open up some healthcare data, massive innovation followed, massive market shifts took place because you had a world that is not transparent in the United States. And the realization was you have to have your Spock on the bridge to help the presidency navigate through the hardest problems that are coming up. Because at the end of the day, to solve those things, you need it. And very acutely, you saw this during COVID. You had a lot of good public health people. You had a lot of political turmoil in the United States simultaneously, but you also had no chief data scientist during that time to help shepherd how to think about this. And the number of times where I got called because there was some kind of question or some kind of issue taking place, my job was to help kind of say, okay, how are we going to utilize data in an effective way to serve the American public on this issue?
And it was actioned on, which is
it was action on. It was always action on, because if you didn't, let me tell you, there is nothing worse in life than getting chewed out by the president. Take your worst day and multiply it. To go home and be like, how's your day? I got chewed out by the president. Okay.
Sounds rough. Nothing compared to our board meeting this one.
No. Other questions? Yeah.
Clearly, he's on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've seen a lot of winners. The thing I think which we've seen also is, the big data movement kind of, I wouldn't say has had a winter, but it's a lot of people, I think rightly so, are saying, hey, I invested a ton in this. I haven't gotten the full ROI back. Like if we're just being fully intellectually honest with ourselves, a lot of people in the organizations are like, this thing is supposed to give me it's supposed to be the oracle. Why is it not giving me all the insights? And there's lots of reasons for that. Culture to technology to abilities to internal politics inside the company or organizations. In the AI sense, why am I optimistic? Because generally on these things, I actually tend to be more pessimistic. I think there's a few things that happens. First, I think when we think about AI, we pin it too much on generative AI around large language models. And I do think that's exciting, but I think we're missing a lot of the other areas where we're seeing really incredible innovation. If we look at the results that we're seeing out of computer vision, phenomenal. We're also seeing finally that there's the ability to take this technology, because so much data infrastructure has been laid by the big data movement. We actually now are like, oh, we can actually do something. The number of people who are like, they saw the code interpreter model, the demo, and they're like, oh my gosh, I could do this with Excel. This feels so powerful. We've excited people in a different way. It wasn't pop science excitement. Now we're seeing a different empowerment. So that feels different. Do I think there's going to be a ton of things that fall flat? Absolutely. But the disproportionate wave of that there's so many people that are coming up, I think is what's going to be there. How do I think this plays out? I could see this being a little bit more like a Web 1.0 to a Web 2.0 world. But I think that it's like mobile is not like, once we go through these, I think this is a moment more, not an evolution. This is a punctured equilibrium moment. For those that kind of are familiar with Stephen Jay Gould's kind of punctured equilibrium moment, like once you go through this, the whole world shifts and changes. Now, who's able to capitalize on it, where it happens? The one place where this gets derailed is if we don't get policy right. This could be trust issues, antitrust issues. This could be control and power dynamics. This could be a whole slew of other things. But the other one that's in there is you could have legislation that goes in there that actually fundamentally hamstrings innovation. And I think this is why Europe is effectively out of this race. But you're going to see also other places. This is a U.S. and you're seeing this interesting dynamic out of China, where China is like, hey, we're actually not that cool with this AI thing because it potentially takes away power from the government. So it's an empowering thing. And then there's going to be this other side, which is there are real societal impacts. We have misinfo, disinfo, all these things. And those when you're on the wrong side of society on these things, that can form a different kind of winter. That forms a different form of paranoia, that society turns on the idea of a certain technology. And when democracy and other ideas those things are at risk because we are living in a fragile society time for some of these things, at least in my view, that's a different form of what's at stake. But if I look at the problem sets that are those biggest ones that I mentioned, like climate change, healthcare access, those types of things, the accelerant that I see connected to saying, hey, we put the ground game foundation in for data, and now what is going to give us a potential real application, that is AI. And the reason this is going to work, it is going to be fundamentally because these are multi-interdisciplinary approaches that take place now, and the technology is accessible. That is fundamentally why I'm bullish on a decadal cycle. Over the short term, I wouldn't be surprised that we're going to see some spectacular failures that are going to cause the market to potentially lose conviction. But those that stay with it will be the winners in the long run. You get to control this.
All right, Megan, go for it.
Oh, thank you for noticing that. That is by intent. I think we easily over-index to technical skills, technical ideas. That is not the barrier in my experience. It's almost all culture. Like there's this movie that's coming out in a little bit. The summer, Oppenheimer. That movie, I spent a bunch of time at Los Alamos National Labs working there on a whole slew of different problems. And I had the opportunity to read the diaries of a number of the people there. And what I took away was the unbelievable complex arguments that were taking place. And what enabled the breakthroughs was culture. It was a culture of intellectual honesty. It was a culture of questioning, testing, focus, all those things. And that's really what I think is there. So where does this go wrong? And where do we lose it? We don't have everyone having a voice, people at the table. When you have the ability to raise their hand, somebody to raise their hand and say, have you thought about this? And everyone goes, whoa, that's really problematic. Those kind of things. How do we make sure, because none of us, our world is so complex. There's no way any one of us can have a worldview of everything. I'll tell you a quick story. So this was at the time when DeepMind had just shown the results around Go. Elon and Bill Gates and numbers were like, AGI, Skynet. And President Obama said, what's going on with this stuff? And we had to kind of say what we thought was going on. And we said, hey, this AGI thing, put it in this bucket. Not a problem for now, but we need to make sure Americans don't feel like Skynet's about to happen like right away. Like this is a problem, but we got to put our pathway to get this correct. However, automation, a thing. And so he sent us off to kind of build a report and come back with an assessment. So we come back with a report, and this is Ed Felton, myself, Alex McGivery. Ed Felton's a professor at Princeton, very well known for his work. And President Obama says, this is good, but I think you're missing the point. We're like, you're a congressional law professor and president. This is something we feel very strongly about, and we're in our wheelhouse. And he laid out an argument saying, I think you're missing how big of a disruption this is going to be for society and the world. And he kind of laid out an argument of all the different things he was thinking about. And I remember walking out of that and going, why does a congressional law professor see this and we can't? And its vantage point. What he was seeing was how trade was changing, how inequity was impacting the country, the world, what was happening with climate. And we were so focused on just building these solutions and trying to do things that it was like, oh, we don't have the right people at the table to help us really understand all the impacts that could take place. And so as I think about this opportunity around us, what we have is we have a couple responsibilities. One is there are so many organizations and institutions out there that don't even know how to talk to us. And it's our responsibility to figure out how to talk to them because they're afraid of us. We talk down to them. We're not nice to them because we think of them as inferior. It's our job. They have really, really hard jobs, and we need to understand what it means to walk in their shoes. Sal Khan did a great job of making teaching cool again. Great, awesome. We should have more of that. The other side of this, I think, is who's in our rooms.
Khan Academy?
Khan Academy. Thank you. we need to make sure we have representation in the room. And I don't just say that because it's an easy thing to do. I've experienced it. When I've been working on policies, just like I gave you that example, the number of times where I was working on something hard and I got pulled aside and somebody said, have you thought about? And I was like, I don't even know what that thing means. And then they were like, well, let me educate you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea what that is. And that ability to be inspired, to understand, and to be better because of it, to build a solution that carries us all on. Otherwise, if we leave out a population, that's where we're going to get destabilized from. And that's why I'm so dogmatic on making sure we get the cultural components right. Because if you get culture right, that is your superpower. That is what's going to drive you fundamentally forward on all these things. And we do not have the culture correct around data and AI as much as I would like it to be. We don't fundamentally. And that's why you see people calling out the issues. What is the actual solution? I don't know. I would love to know, but I think the idea is going to come from a collective we, not an I.
Thanks, DJ. That's it's a great answer and very inspiring.
Well, we can talk afterwards, but we cannot see who else.
Vitaly has been trying to get a question in for a while, so. Yeah.
Sorry, could you speak up? Here, I'm going to give you the mic.
We're both nerds. That's the. I think we're gonna get to the next stage. Nothing's holding us. But no, in truth, it's so. There's a few key things. There's the most important thing is team and talent, right? We raised capital. That's awesome. To deploying capital at this stage means not running paid search ads or, renting a bigger office. It's getting the best people you can into the company so you can scale. And so other than the capital, DJ and the team at GreatPoint have an awesome network in San Francisco. We were at his house a couple of weeks ago and met amazing founders, amazing engineers, product leaders. I'm trying to remember what Roger does everything. There's the guy
who coined the term big data.
Yeah, he's so people like that. So it's really the access to networks is what we were after, and I think we got it. But DJ, your perspective. Yeah.
So focus, people, and the way I tend to look at it is things that work really well is you get a little bit smarter every day. At the end of the week, and everything I've been in, I'm like, I can't believe I was that stupid on Monday. Like by Friday, I'm like, man, why was I thinking so incorrectly about the world? Like that's a pace of learning that needs to happen. And so the way I kind of talk about it is first derivative positive, second derivative positive. You have to not just be you're not velocity isn't there. You have to just be accelerating. And you have to create that culturally where you're iterating and figuring it out and trying and being smart about it. That in my experience has been the number one predictor of success. Because organizations that get that correct, even if you're slightly not correct, and no one's correct right off the bat. It's so hard to be correct, right off the bat. Very rarely do you catch lightning in a bottle right off. And so your ability to pivot and iterate into the right thing is essential. And that is fundamentally the thing. Now, having the right customers that allow you the flexibility as you're iterating and working with you to do that is critical. Having the talent that's willing to go along with that journey and grow, and then an organization that is going to let you take the reins and do all those things, that's critical. And then I think having a community that's equally supportive is really important. I think this is one of the things we see in why Silicon Valley is successful, is that it's more water in the harbor floats all boats approach. I go to a lot of ecosystems. Building a company in Boston, Massachusetts, I was surprised at how little collaboration there is relative to what I was seeing in the San Francisco Bay Area, where it was just trading like, how do you do it? Oh, I do it this way. And you're like, this is what sucks. And this is what the vendor solution, actually the limits are. I'm open sourcing this. Would you want to help on this? And it's so collaborative. And we'll see if that collaboration holds up in a straight up race against each other in AI, because that's going to be the interesting one. But that cross-pollination is going to be critical. And so it's like all those other things, in addition to the focus on the roadmap and just being really ruthless about delivering value for the customer.
Customer obsession. Where's Colin? There you go. Maybe a couple more questions, and actually, I would like to introduce Colin after that. That is also part of our event, and he has some very interesting things to say. He has things to say, and I'll add the interesting. Any other questions? There you go.
So Europe, I think, has taken a lead role in really thinking deeply about the potential impacts of these technologies. I think the challenge has been really in the way GDPR, which is the primary, for those who aren't familiar at this point, this is primary legislation about how to think about privacy. And I think, unfortunately, this is what happens when you have, what we've learned is you need really great policy minds who are more often than not lawyers. They have legal training, and that's really critical because they know how to put things that are codified by our legal systems, but they don't have the technologists at the table. And the number of times I've seen this where we have the policy somewhat correct directionally, and then we do something that just undercuts it because we don't have a technologist there. In the US, we've spent $40 billion US dollars trying to move the healthcare system to use electronic medical records. And now we still have a world where doctors spend more time typing and then talking to you. A lot of these questions around the APIs to all these other regulations and incentive functions, any technologist would have seen the potential issues there. They weren't in the room for that. They just weren't. They didn't even know that they existed. GDPR, I was not there in the room for those, so I can't really say. But they didn't feel like they were there. I see a lot of the similar conversations happening around AI. There's a lot of people I know are phenomenal lawyers, phenomenal policymakers, and I see what they're doing, and I'm like, that's a really bad idea. That's not a good way to think about it. And you would only know it if you tried to build it. In the same way, where I bring up sometimes issues around policy, they're like, that's the stupidest thing ever. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, have you thought about this or this or this? I'm like, nope, didn't even know that was a thing. Thank you for thank you for being on the team kind of approach. So I think that's specifically what's there. The other thing I think EU, the broader European, we'll still say UK in this, is that I think which is a challenge is Canada has done a really fantastic job of trying to figure out how does federally support this, tax credits, the new H-1B policy. That's really fantastic. The US has done a really great job historically of what we'd say we create the spark federally, and then we allow venture and other corporations, industry and large, to fan the flame, to nurture the flame. That's self-driving cars. That ecosystem, and we're not doing a good job in the US on immigration. I think we're doing a very poor job on that front of being the shining light on the hill that and incentivizing the best minds in the world to come work on these problems. But I think one of the things that is there, Europe should be able to say is like, hey, these guys are doing this. What prevents Europe from going after it in this way? It can be a coalition, all-in approach to get there, and that is viable, but it's going to take conviction holistically of Europe to do it.
Maybe one last question, and then
We got one. I think someone by the light. I see.
yeah, the light is very
Go for
bright.
it.
Yeah, go.
Wow, this is a great question. So how do you figure out from a policy perspective almost where to start if you've got data as a thing? I'll tell you kind of a story version that maybe gives some insight to it, because I don't think there's a universal answer. So in the United States, we've had a very serious issue around excessive use of force by our policing sector. And the result of this has been an impact disproportionately on people of color, with the murder of people who are black and brown. And I use the word murder intentionally here. This is not, the evidence I think at this point is pretty clear cut for that. When this was happening, there was a lot of questions around body cameras, other ways to do things, what are the issues at hand? And when the policy team started, it was really run by Valerie Jarrett, who's one of President Obama's kind of key advisors, and the civil rights team. And they said, like, we're going to start trying to figure out what to do here. We're going to listen to people. We're going to do a bunch of listening tours. We're going to bring people to the White House. We're going to talk to people. We're going to talk to the families, the community, religious leaders, everybody. And we said, we'd like to be part of it. And they're like, well, what do you guys know about this? And he said, nothing. But we know it's important. And then we know there's people impacted, and we know how to scale things. And so because I had a fancy title, they couldn't really get rid of me. And so I was sitting in these meetings, and this was going on. And then one day they were bringing up the body camera questions or thinking about this. And I said, by the way, who's going to pay for the bandwidth for when that data is transmitted, if we're going to give a lot of dollars to buy these cameras to a city? How are we going to make sure the policies for who gets to view this data first, the privacy, all the other questions, are going to be handled? What happens if there's kids in the images? What happens if there's manipulation of these images, cybersecurity issues? And you could just see everyone around the room was like, that's why we don't invite DJ. And no one was thinking of these things because they didn't even know what to ask these things. I talked to a chief of police, a really great guy who was trying to do the right things. And I was talking to him about enterprise vendor contracts. And then the line just goes quiet. And I was like, Chief, you still there? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I know how to buy tires and bullets and training. He's like, all these words about, the contract. He's like, I don't even know what that means. He's like, is there anybody who can help me? And we realized, like, oh, this is the gap. And so that then said, we're not going to just put a direct set of solutions there. We're going to ask the community to come into this problem and then to approach this by saying, we have a remarkable opportunity because every city is an experiment. So just like here in Toronto is probably doing a lot of spectacular things that are very different than what's happening in Ottawa or Vancouver, or pick your favorite, most remote outpost. And so what we look at is say, what is a unique set of things, experiments that people have discovered in which one of these things? Can we pull a commonality together, which is what we refer to as scout out these things? And then it's our job to figure out what the policy is that allows it to be scalable. When we put all these things together, we realize, hey, there's no way to actually understand what's happening in one police department versus another police department around the country. Like, they just have no idea. Even people in the same state don't know. San Francisco Police Department has no idea how San Diego is doing. And so we said, okay, if we're going to do that, let's put that in place. Let's get them to share the data, the right privacy, all these things. Those programs that we put in cover more than 92 million Americans by the time we left the administration. In a sort of span of like a year, we were able to get to 92 Americans. Very bipartisan on all these things, not a political issue. Everyone was all in. And so that then opened up the ability for people to do deeper assessments on data. And in fact, one of the early AI applications was this realization that if you look at excessive use of force data, and you look at the factors that contribute to some of the most egregious incidents of excessive use, down in the middle of the rankings, there are two items that show up as factors. One is officer responded previously to domestic violence where a child is present, or they responded to a mental health intervention where a suicide took place. And so we looked at that in this team that was building this out with AI. This was done through University of Chicago with Yevgeniy and team. They looked at this and they said, whoa, what's going on? But because they were taking this very technological, user-centric approach, they looked at all this and they said, oh my gosh, we know what's happening. An officer goes to that situation. They may not be the direct officer, very emotionally charged incidents. And then they're sent out again, out on patrol. And that patrol then, maybe they pull someone over and they're flippant with them or something happens and they've had no time to decompress. So they are literally like a stick of dynamite in our society. We've not given them time. So I said, why can't we got this information, why can't we use machine learning to build a smart dispatch system that takes into account the type of incident that an officer came from to make sure they have the right time to decompress, or to make sure we're treating people as humans. We're treating officers as humans, not just some worker who's just like next. And to me, that idea, we did not come up with that. I did not come up with that. We said that, I saw that and we said, dang, that's good. Can we get behind that? Can we get the buy-in by everyone else? And that then fosters this cycle that allows us to move forward on the use of technology, data. And then through that process, we're like, what are the blockers? What prevents us from doubling the speed of, what allows us to double the speed and what allows us to double the impact? Those two things together then allow us to figure out what are the policy things we need to do to allow that impact to take place.
Thanks, DJ. Do you want another question? I think we're...
I don't know. People
anyone
don't
else?
have drinks, so I feel bad. We can talk afterwards.
Yeah, we can keep talking. So this will be a thank our sponsors moment, except our sponsors are also our friends. So we really like them. So GreatPoint, Golden Ventures, Jamie over there, and AWS were kind enough to help us make this event happen, and we really appreciate it. And Colin, who's been a friend for a long time, way before AWS, but especially now, want to come and say a couple words?
This is a big stage to share, and a really tough act to follow. So thank you guys for the opportunity. When Sarah, where's Sarah? Yeah, there. Sarah is Yev's account manager and a super talented account manager for us at AWS. When she came to me and said that there was an opportunity to sponsor this event, I was super, super excited. And then I found out that there was nobody on the schedule that could speak. So now I'm here. I'm still excited, but following DJ and Yev is a challenge. I work in business development, which is a title that is a little less clear than even data scientist. If you ask me what I do, I say I do nice things for startups. We have a whole team of people at AWS that does nice things for startups. The Canada team I'm particularly proud of. So, Sarah and Stefan and Patricia and Kevin, if you guys have worked with any of the folks that are on their team, they're spectacular. The thing that finds me in this business development job actually is LinkedIn's matching algorithm. So in a way, you guys are to blame for this speech. So you should know that. I also realized when I was preparing for this that I couldn't really put up a 79 slide first call deck, not when there's an open bar. So I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can. The plug that I'll make is the same plug that Yev made. We are at AWS, when it comes to machine learning and AI, ecumenical. Right? We want you to be able to use your tools your way. This is throughout our products, especially when it comes to generative AI. We want you to have a selection of models. We want you to be able to use the best open source. We want you to use the best models from labs like Anthropic and Claude and Cohere. We want those things to be available to you and to be really easy for you to use. If you want to know more about that, we can talk when there isn't an open bar. I'm happy to have a conversation around that. There's one story that I want to just tag on to something you said that I think is really, really interesting. Do you folks know who the traitorous 8 were? So this is an amazing story. In the 1950s, the United States was the shining beacon on the hill, attracting talent from all over the world. And there was one particular American engineer named Bill Shockley who invented the transistor while working at Bell Labs. And he decided that on the strength of the transistor, he was going to found a company. And it wasn't a traditional venture capital deal because that didn't exist yet. He went to his employer. He got a corporate venture deal, essentially, to start a lab in Palo Alto, of all places. There was nothing there. It was the desert. So he went there. He hired 8 outstanding PhDs, all white dudes. We chalk that up to inequities of history. Something that I hope we can do differently with our own experiment here in Canada. He hired these 8 PhDs. These were guys like Gordon Moore of Moore's Law and Robert Noyce, who founded Intel, and a guy named Eugene Kleiner, who went on to be the Kleiner and Kleiner Perkins Caulfield Byers. So what happened in that is those 8 folks went to work for Bill Shockley. And Bill Shockley won the Nobel Prize. And things didn't go quite the way they wanted. So they left together and they found real venture capital from a guy named Fairchild. Okay, and they formed Fairchild Semiconductor, which they also located in the Valley. And that became the root of Silicon Valley. Out of Fairchild Semiconductor came the Fairchildren. Okay, that was AMD, Intel, a dozen other companies. And that story has sort of repeated itself. I think what's happening for us in this community, and I'm so proud for you to say that there's this kind of opportunity here in Canada, is that we have our own really significant scientists. Guys like Joshua Bengio, Jeffrey Hinton, Rich Sutton at the Amy Lab. These are like the 3 big labs here in Canada that are CFAR labs focused on AI and ML. And from their communities, we've seen Cohere with Aidan Gomez get founded. We've seen OpenAI with Ilya Sutskever get founded. Like, we've seen these things explode from that AI moment that was led from those CFAR labs here in Toronto. In addition, we've got the ability to attract talent from all over the world. We may not be the shining light on the hill, but we are a shining light on a toboggan hill here. We are attracting talent, and I think Yev's team at Shakudo is a great example of that. And in fact, most of the technical teams that I've had the honor to work with here in Toronto have had that flavor. They've been people who are first-generation Canadians, or they're people who have been here from all over the world that have come here. They've had access to great education, or they brought great education with them. They have access to a lifestyle and the ability to bring their kids up in safety and in security. And I think that's really an outstanding thing. I guess what I want to say is that I think Shakudo is a great example of what can happen in our community here in Toronto, but also in the communities in Montreal, in Vancouver, in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Dartmouth, across Canada. I also think that, interestingly enough, while there's a great story to be told around Bill Shockley and the Trader Estate, I think those stories are told really everywhere, whether it's Mumbai and Delhi or Tokyo or Berlin or Minsk. Those kinds of things happen. But what happens really well in the Valley is how they tell their story. So the thing that I would say that's phenomenal here is that Yev has a story that he's building here. Us at AWS are just honored to be part of that. If you have a story like that, we want to be part of it too. That's what our startups team does. We want to be the people who help you add to your story and help you be successful. And we hope that what we can do, particularly here in the Canadian community, is build a lot of those great stories and be a great support for that. So, I want to thank again Yev and his whole team at Shakudo for allowing me to, say this today and to be part of this event. So thank you.
All right, DJ, any closing remarks?
No, hit the bar.
Let's hit
Have
the bar.
time.
All right,
I hope
thank
you all
you.
talk to each other.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.